Listen closely, because the history books lied to you. There are ghosts breathing among us, men who traded their souls for our safety and were left to rot in the gutters. When a cocky young Marine tried to publicly humiliate a shivering vagrant, he accidentally awakened a classified nightmare. The storm hammering against the corrugated steel roof of Hangar 4 at Joint Base Lewis McChord sounded like a continuous drumroll of artillery fire. Outside, the Washington night was a freezing, unforgiving deluge of black rain and howling wind. Inside, however, it was a scene of polished brass, clinking champagne glasses, and the warm, expensive glow of the annual Heritage Flight Gala. The hangar had been transformed into a museum of military history, hosted by wealthy defense contractors and attended by the highest echelons of military command. In the center of the vast space sat immaculately restored relics of war, a P-51 Mustang, a Korean War-era saber, and the crown jewel of the evening, a battle-scarred Sikorsky HH-53 helicopter, freshly salvaged and transported for the event. Standing near the partially opened loading bay doors, tasked with keeping the civilian catering staff organized, was Corporal Derek Reynolds. At 22 years old, Reynolds was fresh off a Pacific rotation. He was sharp, athletic, and possessed that specific brand of arrogant invincibility that only young Marines who haven't yet tasted true catastrophic loss can muster. Beside him stood Private First Class Connor Davies, equally young and eager to impress. "Look at this crowd, man," Reynolds muttered, adjusting the collar of his dress blues. "Half these guys in the suits probably never held a rifle in their lives, but they're in here drinking top-shelf bourbon, talking about the theater of war like it's a movie they produced." Davies chuckled, taking a drag from a discreetly cupped vape. "Hey, as long as they keep signing the checks for the new gear, I don't care what they talk about." Reynolds rolled his eyes, turning his gaze toward the storm outside. That was when he saw the silhouette. Moving slowly through the sheet of rain, a hunched figure was making its way toward the sliver of light spilling from the hangar doors. As the figure stepped into the harsh glare of the security halogens, Reynolds crossed his arms. It was an old man. He looked to be in his late 70s, though the deep, canyon-like wrinkles on his face and the hollowed-out exhaustion in his eyes made him look ancient. He was soaked to the bone. Water poured off the brim of a frayed, unbranded baseball cap. He wore a tattered, olive-drab M65 field jacket that was several sizes too big, heavily stained with years of street grime and neglect. His boots were wrapped in duct tape. The smell of wet wool, stale tobacco, and the distinct, heartbreaking odor of chronic homelessness drifted into the hangar. The old man didn't look at Reynolds. He just stared blankly at the warmth inside, his jaw shivering uncontrollably, and took a step toward the threshold. "Whoa, whoa, hold up there, Pop," Reynolds said, stepping directly into the center of the doorway, physically blocking the entrance. "This is a closed event, private gala. You need an invitation, and somehow I doubt you've got one in those pockets." The old man paused. He didn't look angry. He didn't look scared. He just looked through Reynolds, as if the young, physically imposing Marine was made of glass. Just need to dry off," the old man rasped. His voice sounded like two pieces of rusted metal scraping together. "Just for a minute. Cold out there." "I get it, man. It's rough out," Reynolds said, his tone dripping with condescension. He glanced back at Davies, flashing a smirk, playing to his audience of one. "But the Salvation Army is about 3 miles down the road. You can't be in here mixing with the generals looking like that." The old man didn't move. His pale, washed-out blue eyes flicked from Reynolds to the lavish party inside, settling for a brief, agonizing second on the restored HH-53 helicopter in the distance. A strange shadow passed over his face. Reynolds, annoyed by the defiance, decided to push. He looked at the tattered M65 jacket. "Nice coat," You buy that at a surplus store downtown? Or did you steal it off someone who actually served? Davies shifted uncomfortably. Come on, Reynolds. Just let him stand in the foyer. Don't be a dick. Nah, I hate stolen valor, Reynolds scoffed, leaning in closer to the old man. You want to wear the uniform, old man. You gotta know the language. What was your MOS? You an 0311? You peel potatoes in the mess hall? What was your military occupational specialty? The ambient noise of the hangar was loud. A jazz band was playing a soft rendition of a 1940s standard. Hundreds of conversations buzzed, but as the old man slowly raised his head to finally look Reynolds in the eye, the atmosphere around the door seemed to undergo a rapid drop in barometric pressure. The old man's shivering stopped. His posture, previously hunched and frail, subtly shifted. For a fleeting microsecond, the exhausted vagrant vanished, replaced by something cold, coiled, and terrifyingly still. I didn't have an MOS, son, the old man whispered. The rasp was gone. His voice was suddenly steady, carrying a chilling resonance. I had a weather pattern. Reynolds frowned, his arrogant smile faltering. What the hell is that supposed to mean? A weather pattern? The old man didn't blink. Reaper storm. About 10 feet away, leaning against a cocktail table, was Master Sergeant Thomas Hayes. Hayes was 58 years old, a career lifer who had seen the worst of Fallujah, the Korengal Valley, and a dozen classified sandbox operations before either Reynolds or Davies were even born. He was quietly sipping a glass of club soda, half listening to the young Marine's interaction with the homeless man, ready to step in if Reynolds got too aggressive. When the words Reaper Storm left the old man's lips, Hayes froze. The heavy crystal glass slipped from the Master Sergeant's fingers. It hit the polished concrete floor with a violent, shattering crack. In a quiet room, a dropped glass is an accident. In a room filled with combat veterans, a sudden sharp noise causes an instant, instinctual reaction. Conversations in a 50-foot radius died instantly. Heads snapped toward the door, but Hayes didn't reach for a weapon, nor did he look around for a threat. His face, usually a mask of weathered bronze, had drained a full color. He stared at the homeless man with an expression that bordered on absolute horror and profound reverence. "Corporal Reynolds," Hayes said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the lingering jazz music like a razor blade. It trembled a sound Reynolds had never, ever heard from the hardened Master Sergeant. "Step away from that man, right now." Reynolds blinked, thoroughly confused. "Master Sergeant, he's just some vagrant. I said step the hell back, Corporal." Hayes roared, his voice echoing off the high steel beams of the hangar. The jazz band abruptly stopped playing. The hangar went completely suffocatingly cold. Reynolds scrambled backward, his boots sliding slightly on the wet concrete, his mind struggling to process the sudden, explosive rage from his superior. He watched, bewildered, as Master Sergeant Hayes, a man who had once calmly directed medevac choppers while taking sniper fire, approached the shivering old man with slow, deliberate steps, as if approaching a live, unexploded bomb. "Sir," Hayes said, his voice dropping to a low, tight whisper as he stopped 3 feet from the vagrant. He didn't say buddy. He didn't say old-timer. He said, "Sir." Are you telling the truth?" The old man, who still hadn't broken eye contact with the space where Reynolds had just been standing, slowly turned his gaze to Hayes. He looked at the Master Sergeant's rank insignia, then into his eyes. "The wind is blowing from the east, Master Sergeant," the old man said softly. Hayes swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He snapped to rigid attention, right there in the middle of the hangar, ignoring the hundreds of wealthy donors, captains, and generals who were now staring at the bizarre scene unfolding by the loading doors. "And the rain falls on the righteous," Hayes replied, completing the countersign with a trembling breath. He remained at the position of attention. "My God, we thought you were all dead, sir. My name is Hayes, 1st Battalion." "I know who you are, Tommy," the old man interrupted gently. "I remember your father. He flew the birds that pulled us out of the valley in '72. You have his eyes." Hayes looked like he was about to weep. He quickly stripped off his own expensive tailored dress coat and draped it gently over the old man's soaking wet, foul-smelling shoulders. Reynolds, unable to contain his confusion and bruised ego, stepped forward. "Master Sergeant, what is going on? Who is this guy?" "What is a Reaper Storm?" Hayes turned his head slowly, glaring at Reynolds with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You asked for his MOS, Corporal," Hayes hissed, stepping toward Reynolds, keeping his voice low so the civilian crowd couldn't hear. "He doesn't have one because his file doesn't exist. His unit didn't exist. You think you're a badass because you did a tour in Okinawa." Reaper Storm was a Black Book termination protocol sanctioned by the CIA and Military Assistance Command during the darkest days of the Cold War. They weren't soldiers, they were ghosts. Davies, the young private, looked terrified. "Ghosts, Master Sergeant." "They were a 5-man element," Hayes explained, his eyes darting back to the old man to ensure he wasn't overstepping. "No names. No dog tags. No official records. When the government needed an off-the-books facility erased, and I don't mean neutralized, I mean completely wiped from the face of the earth without a trace of American involvement, they sent in Reaper Storm. They did the things that keep the devil awake at night so you and I can sleep in our comfortable beds. The survival rate for their missions was calculated at 0%, and yet this man is standing here." Reynolds felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at the frail, shivering man, now draped in Hayes's coat. The realization of what he had just mocked washed over him like ice water. But the old man wasn't paying attention to them anymore. His focus had shifted entirely away from the doors, away from the rain. He was looking toward the center of the hangar, specifically at the massive olive-drab bulk of the restored HH-53 helicopter. Without a word, the old man began to walk. He didn't limp anymore. The shuffle of a broken homeless vagrant had vanished, replaced by a terrifyingly silent, fluid stride. The crowd of wealthy donors, politicians, and high-ranking brass instinctively parted as he approached, sensing the dangerous electric aura radiating from him. Women in expensive evening gowns pulled their dresses back. Men in tailored suits stepped aside, completely silent. He walked past a 4-star general who opened his mouth to say something, saw the look in the old man's eyes, and wisely snapped his jaw shut. The old man stopped at the nose of the helicopter. He reached out a trembling, dirt-caked hand and placed it against the cold metal fuselage. He closed his eyes. The hangar was so quiet you could hear the rain pounding on the roof above and the hum of the portable generators outside. He moved his hand slowly along the side of the aircraft, his fingers tracing the patched-up bullet holes that the restoration team had left visible for authenticity. He stopped at a specific cluster of patched holes near the side gunner's window. From deep within the pockets of his wet M65 jacket, the old man produced a heavily rusted piece of metal. It was a single deformed dob tag, blackened by fire and time. "They got Jimmy right here," the old man whispered to the empty air, though in the silence of the hangar his voice carried. Took a 12.7mm round through the door. Never even made a sound. Suddenly the crowd shifted. Approaching from the VIP podium was the host of the gala, Richard Caldwell. Caldwell was a billionaire defense contractor, a man whose company manufactured guidance systems for modern drones. He was impeccably dressed, exuding power and wealth. He had been giving a speech when the interruption occurred and looked visibly irritated by the homeless man, touching the centerpiece of his $1 million event. "Excuse me," Caldwell boomed, his authoritative voice breaking the silence. "Security, get this man away from the display. Who let him in here?" 2 private security guards in black suits began to move forward, but Master Sergeant Hayes instantly stepped into their path, resting his hand on his sidearm, shaking his head once. The guards stopped dead. Caldwell frowned, marching forward himself. "I don't care what kind of veteran charity case this is. This aircraft is privately owned by my firm and—" Caldwell stopped. He was now 10 feet from the helicopter. The old man slowly turned his head away from the metal fuselage and locked eyes with the billionaire. Under the bright museum lights, the dirt, the beard, and the age couldn't hide the bone structure beneath. Caldwell's face went completely slack. The expensive champagne flute he was holding slipped from his grip, shattering on the floor, an eerie echo of Hayes' reaction moments earlier. Caldwell began to tremble. His knees visibly buckled, and he had to grab a velvet stanchion to keep from collapsing. "Arthur." Caldwell choked out, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched wheeze. "Arthur, it can't be." The old man, Arthur, stared at the billionaire. The look in his pale eyes wasn't anger. It was something much colder, much worse. "You got fat, Dickie," Arthur said, his voice echoing through the dead silent hangar. "You got fat, you got rich, and you got old." Arthur took one slow step toward the billionaire. "But I bet," Arthur whispered, "you still remember the extraction coordinates you never showed up to." The silence inside Hangar 4 was no longer just quiet. It was suffocating. The air felt heavy, charged with the kind of electricity that precedes a fatal lightning strike. Hundreds of the most powerful military and civilian figures in the country stood frozen, their champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres forgotten. All eyes were locked on the impossible standoff between a shivering, homeless ghost and a billionaire defense tycoon. Richard Caldwell, a man who regularly dined with senators and dictated global defense contracts, looked as though he were physically shrinking inside his custom-tailored Italian suit. His skin had turned the color of old parchment. "Arthur, I thought you were dead in the valley," Caldwell stammered, his voice cracking. He raised his hands defensively, palms out. The official report was written by you, Dickie," Arthur interrupted, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that carried perfectly across the polished concrete. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You were a 24-year-old CIA intelligence liaison operating out of the Saigon Annex. You were supposed to be our eye in the sky. You were supposed to hold the extraction window open at grid coordinate Romeo Tango 7. Arthur took another slow step forward. Caldwell flinched, stumbling back until his spine hit the velvet ropes of the display. "We held that ridge for 4 days," Arthur continued, his pale eyes burning with the ghosts of a 50-year-old nightmare. 5 men. No resupply. No air support. We completed the objective. We secured the Soviet telemetry data from the crashed satellite. We bled into the mud while we listened to your voice on the PRC-77 radio, telling us the birds were 3 mics out. You told us to pop green smoke. Corporal Derek Reynolds felt his stomach violently twist. He looked at Private Davies, who was completely pale. The young Marines were witnessing the exhumation of a buried, bloody secret, realizing that the man they had mocked outside in the freezing rain had endured a hell they couldn't even begin to comprehend. Master Sergeant Tommy Hayes stood perfectly still, his hand resting near his service weapon, his eyes scanning the crowd to ensure no one intervened. He was guarding Arthur. The homeless man had outranked everyone in the room the moment he spoke the words Reaper Storm. "We popped the smoke," Arthur said, reaching out to trace the air in front of him, as if he could still see the neon green plume rising through the jungle canopy. And the NVA saw it. They zeroed in on our position. We took mortar fire. Jimmy caught shrapnel in the neck. We dragged him to the clearing, watching the sky. And then we heard the rotors. Arthur stopped and slowly turned his head to look at the massive, restored HH-5B3 helicopter sitting behind him. "This bird," Arthur whispered, his voice cracking for the first time. "Tail number 442. I recognized the patch welds on the fuselage." She came hovering over the tree line. We were dragging Jimmy. And then she banked hard left and pulled away, just left us there in the mud. I didn't have a choice." Caldwell suddenly shouted, desperation breaking his composure. Tears were welling in the billionaire's eyes, his pristine public image shattering into a million pieces. The command structure ordered a burn. The op was compromised. If they found out we had crossed the Laotian border to get that data, it would have started World War III. "The agency told me to cut the cord." "The agency didn't tell you to steal the telemetry data, Dickie," Arthur countered, his voice dropping to a deadly, icy whisper. A collective gasp rippled through the front row of the crowd. General David Braden, a 4-star commander of the Joint Chiefs who had been standing near the podium, suddenly went rigid. He stepped forward, his face hardening into stone. "Explain that, soldier," General Braden commanded, addressing Arthur but glaring daggers at Caldwell. Arthur didn't salute, he just looked at the general. He cut our comms, declared us KIA, and took the data we had transmitted to his forward operating base. He scrubbed his own agency records, resigned his commission a year later, and used that stolen Soviet guidance technology to found Caldwell Aerospace. The foundation of his entire empire, Arthur pointed a trembling, dirt-caked finger at the billionaire, is built on the blood of my 4 brothers. "It's a lie," Caldwell shrieked, looking frantically around at the crowd. "He's a crazy vagrant. He's a homeless lunatic. Security, get him out of here. General Braden, you can't possibly believe this. This deranged, stolen case." Arthur reached deep into the inside pocket of the oversized Master Sergeant's dress coat he was wearing. He bypassed the frayed lining of his own M65 jacket beneath it. From a hidden, waterproof pouch he produced a small, severely tarnished silver cylinder. "I survived the jungle, Dickie," Arthur said softly. "Took me 3 years to walk out of that country. Took me another 40 to stay hidden while the agency men who wanted me dead slowly died off of old age. I lived in the gutters. I ate out of trash cans. I abandoned my identity, my family, and my life to make sure I stayed alive long enough to see this day." He tossed the silver cylinder onto the polished concrete floor. It clattered and rolled, coming to a stop directly at General Braden's polished dress shoes. "That's the original analog microtape recording of the radio transmission," Arthur said, staring directly into Caldwell's terrified eyes. "You ordering the pilot of this exact helicopter to turn around. You explicitly stating you had the data and that Reaper storm was expendable. I pulled it off the bird's flight recorder right before a sympathetic mechanic smuggled me onto a cargo plane out of Bali. The hangar was dead silent, save for the relentless drumming of the rain on the steel roof." General Braden slowly bent down and picked up the tarnished cylinder. He rolled it between his fingers, inspecting the archaic military seal. He looked up at Caldwell. "Richard," General Braden said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "Is this true?" Caldwell opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the tape, then at Arthur, then at the ring of military police who had quietly begun to filter into the hangar, drawn by the commotion. He collapsed to his knees, burying his face in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The billionaire defense contractor, a titan of industry, was reduced to a broken shell in front of Washington's elite. "Military police," General Braden barked, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Take Mr. Caldwell into federal custody, pending an immediate tribunal investigation for treason, espionage, and the murder of United States military personnel." Four MPs immediately stepped forward, pulling the sobbing billionaire to his feet and firmly applying steel handcuffs. As Caldwell was dragged away, the wealthy donors and politicians parted, watching in stunned, horrified silence. The empire was over. The truth had finally come due. Arthur stood completely still, watching the man who had ruined his life disappear through the side doors. The heavy, rigid tension in the old veteran's shoulders suddenly seemed to evaporate. He looked exhausted. The sheer force of will that had animated him, turning a frail vagrant into a terrifying force of nature, faded away, leaving behind a very tired, very old man. He turned toward the open loading bay doors where the storm was still raging. He began to shuffle toward the exit, his duty finally complete. "Sir, wait!" Corporal Derek Reynolds broke from his position, practically sprinting after the old man. Master Sergeant Hayes took a step to intercept, but stopped, watching the young Marine. Reynolds stepped in front of Arthur, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of profound shame and awe. The cocky, arrogant kid who had stood at the door 20 minutes ago was gone, completely eradicated by the gravity of what he had just witnessed. Reynolds didn't say a word. He simply snapped his heels together, locked his arms to his sides, and rendered the sharpest, most perfect salute he had ever delivered in his entire military career. Arthur stopped. He looked at the young Marine's trembling hand. For a long moment, the old ghost didn't move. Then a faint, incredibly weary smile touched the corners of his mouth. Slowly, fighting the arthritis and the cold in his joints, Arthur raised his right hand and returned a salute. "You asked me what my MOS was, son," Arthur said gently. "Yes, sir," Reynolds choked out, fighting back the tears that were suddenly burning his eyes. "I was a fool, sir. I had no right." "The uniform you're wearing is heavy," Arthur said, his eyes scanning Reynolds' dress blues. "It's supposed to be. It carries the weight of everyone who bled in it before you, and everyone who will bleed in it after you're gone. Don't ever use it to look down on someone. You never know what war they're fighting in the dark." Reynolds lowered his hand. "I won't, sir. I swear to God I never will again." Arthur nodded slowly. He adjusted the heavy dress coat Master Sergeant Hayes had given him and turned back toward the freezing rain. "Hold up, Arthur," a firm voice called out. Master Sergeant Hayes walked over, holding an umbrella and a steaming cup of black coffee he had grabbed from the catering table. He stepped out into the rain, holding the umbrella over the old man's head. "You're not going back out there, sir," Hayes said quietly, handing Arthur the coffee. "My truck is parked out back. My wife makes a hell of a pot roast, and we have a spare bedroom that's a lot warmer than the streets. It's time to come home, brother." Arthur looked at the cup of coffee, the steam rising into the cold Washington night. He looked at Hayes, then back at the brightly lit hangar, where generals and politicians were now frantically making phone calls. The ghost of Reaper Storm took a long, slow sip of the coffee. He closed his eyes, savoring the warmth. "Pot roast sounds real good, Tommy," Arthur whispered. Together, the Master Sergeant and the old ghost walked out into the storm, leaving the hangar, the helicopter, and 50 years of shadows behind them. If this story gave you chills, you are not alone. The sacrifices made in the shadows often carry the heaviest burdens, and the ghosts of our past never truly stay buried. What do you think about Arthur's incredible 50-year mission for justice? Hit that like button, share this powerful story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable true-life military stories.